In this video, it's iPad mini versus Nexus 7. So let's start off with price. The iPad mini retails for $370 in Australia, whereas this retails for $250 for the 16GB models, respectively. Because Google recently dropped the 8GB model of this and put the 16GB as the same price. So this is a $120 premium over this little guy, the Nexus 7. Talking about weight, the iPad mini is 10.88 ounces and it feels very light. And the Nexus 7 is 11.99 ounces. And it definitely feels heavier, because as you can see, the iPad mini is actually a little bigger than the Nexus 7. And with it being lighter over a bigger surface area, it makes it just feel generally a lot lighter than the Nexus. Talking about thickness, the iPad mini is 0.28 inches thick, whereas the Nexus 7 is 0.41 inches thick. And as you can see, there is a noticeable difference there. Talking about width, the iPad mini is 5.3 inches in width, and the Nexus 7 is 4.7 inches in width. And as for screen size, this is 7.9 inches, this is 7 inches, and they both have 10 hours of battery life. And this has a resolution of 1024 by 768, and the Nexus 7 has a higher resolution of 1280 by 800, and because it's on a smaller screen, this definitely is a lot clearer, especially when reading text, and this seems fuzzier. Although, even though the Nexus 7 has a higher res display, the iPad mini definitely has a better quality display in terms of color saturation, viewing angles, everything like that. In my opinion, apart from resolution, the iPad mini does have a much better display in terms of quality, but this has the pixel density. And the iPad has 275,000 tablet apps optimized for tablet, whereas Android doesn't have barely any. Mostly on the Nexus 7 you're running scaled up phone apps. So in terms of the tablet apps, the iPad definitely has that in the bag. And as for cameras, this has a front-facing 1.3 megapixel HD camera, and on the back it has a 5 megapixel 1080p camera, whereas on the Nexus 7 you just have one lousy VGA camera with nothing on the back. And we have two different operating systems. This is running iOS 6 and this is running Android 4.1 Jelly Bean. Now Jelly Bean is a lot better for customization. As you can see, I've got widgets for various things on my home screen, and I love having the ability to do that. On the iPad there is very little / no customization. There are also two different voice applications on each. This has Siri and this has Google Now. Let's go ahead and test out Google Now and Siri. Who is the Prime Minister of Australia?
I'm on it.
As you can see, the Nexus 7 has already got up Julia Gillard.
This might answer your question.
As you can see, the Nexus 7 got a picture and it says Julia Gillard, Australia Prime Minister. Whereas on Siri, all it gives you is this might answer your question, Australia Prime Minister Julia Gillard, with no picture whatsoever. Oh, it does, excuse me, it does have a little picture down the bottom. But I personally prefer the UI of Google Now, giving you a hardware tour of both devices. On the iPad mini we have the front-facing camera and the home button. On the bottom, lightning connector and speakers. On the right hand side, volume down, volume up and rotation switch. On the top, power button, microphone, headphone jack. Left hand side, nothing. On the back, 5 megapixel camera and Apple logo. Giving you a hardware tour of the Nexus 7. We've got the VGA camera, and on the right hand side, power button and volume rocker. And on the bottom, the micro USB port as well as the headphone jack. Also, the iPad has a physical button, whereas the Nexus 7 has software on-screen buttons. One thing I noticed with the Nexus 7 is that it's a lot easier to hold in one hand. Holding the iPad mini in one hand is achievable, however, it is a struggle. From a hardware perspective, the Nexus 7 is a lot superior actually to the iPad mini. This has a quad-core Tegra 3 processor running at 1.3 GHz with a gigabyte of RAM, and it has a Geekbench score of 1,449. whereas the iPad mini has a dual-core processor, 512 megabytes of RAM, and a Geekbench score of 754. However, they do both run pretty smooth, and that's really just down to the software optimization at the end of the day. But in terms of raw power, the Nexus 7 does have more raw power at its disposal. So really guys, that's going to do it for this one. If you have any questions about my thoughts on which one you should get, go ahead and drop a comment right down below in the comment section. Really though, if you're already in the iOS ecosystem, if you have a Mac, if you have an iPhone, if you've already bought a ton of apps for your iPhone, which you can re-download all in here for no additional cost, then you'll probably want an iPad mini if you want a smaller iPad and are not interested in the bigger one. However, if you have a big iPad, you may want to get your hands on this first and see if it's really necessary. If you have an Android phone, if you're invested in the Google Play app market, if you've already bought a lot of apps, they will all work on here. Even if you paid for them for your phone, you can re-download them on here for free. Or if you just like customization of Android, even if you own an iPhone and a Mac, you may want to get the Nexus 7 as it is a lot cheaper, and I really like messing around with Android and the customization it offers. Click subscribe right above. Follow me on Twitter over at twitter.com/iTechEverything and give me a thumbs up as I really appreciate it.